The training field was silent, save for the heavy breathing of a dozen elite handlers. Among them stood Smoky, a bami-kilogram German Shepherd Labrador mix avec épité hat, black and tan fur and ears that stood perfectly erect, scanning for a command. But when the simulated flashbang went off, something in Smoky broke. While the other dogs lunged toward the enemy, Smoky froze, his intelligent dark brown eyes filled with an ancient, inexplicable terror. He didn't bark, he did not run, he simply sat down and trembled. To the military trainers he was a washout, a failure. Too soft for the front lines, too sensitive for the noise of war. He was labelled gun-shy and sent to a local shelter, a discarded weapon with no war to fight. Miles away, William Wynne sat in a darkened room, the glow of the television reflecting in his deep moss-green eyes. At nummy years old, William looked every bit the Navy SEAL he once was. Broad shoulders, a powerful square jawline, and a salt-and-pepper military buzz cut that matched his short, boxed beard. But beneath the rugged, sun-kissed skin and the deep wrinkles on his forehead lay a hidden fracture. A traumatic brain injury TBI from his final tour had left him a shadow of his former self. His muscular, 7-foot-high frame, once capable of carrying a teammate through a desert, now shook during sudden silent seizures. He felt like a broken machine, sitting in the dark, waiting for a purpose that no longer existed. Little did he know a failure from the K9 unit was about to choose him. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. William didn't want a hero, he just wanted a reason to wake up. He walked into the shelter with a heavy rhythmic gait, his boots thudding against the linoleum. When he reached Smoki's kennel, the shelter worker shook her head. "You don't want this one, Commander. He's gun-shy, a loud car backfiring sends him under the bed. He's the wrong dog for a man like you." But as William looked down, Smoky didn't hide. The dog stood with a perfectly upright posture, his long, strong muzzle twitching as he caught William's scent. Smoky's intelligent brown eyes locked onto William's moss-green ones, seeing past the scars and the TBI. Smoky didn't see a broken warrior. He smelled a storm brewing inside the man's nervous system. The dog placed a single tan paw on the cage door. At that moment, the failed soldier and the failed dog recognized each other. Before we continue this journey of healing, if you believe that every dog deserves a second chance, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories of incredible loyalty. William signed the papers, his rough, calloused hands trembling slightly. "He's just like me," William whispered to the worker, his deep voice gravelly. "Discarded because the world thinks he's broken. Let's see who's really wrong." The first few nights at William's house were a dance of two ghosts. Smoky was terrified of the vacuum cleaner and the clatter of a dropped spoon, his ears pinning back in shame every time he flinched. William watched him from the shadows of the hallway, rubbing the crow's feet near his eyes. He saw himself in the dog's anxiety. Every time a car roared past the house, Smoky would retreat to the corner, his black and tan fur bristling. William would sit on the floor beside him, his massive, muscular frame dwarfing the dog, and simply stay there until the trembling stopped. "Mot get it, buddy," William would mutter, his salt-and-pepper beard brushing against Smoky's soft ears. "The world is too loud for us now." However, William began to notice something strange. Smoky wasn't just anxious, he was hyper-vigilant. He didn't just watch the door, he watched William. Specifically, he watched William's hands and the way his eyes would occasionally glaze over. Whenever William felt the familiar, cold creeping sensation of an impending TBI-related seizure, Smoky would stop whatever he was doing. The dog would trot over and press his long muzzle firmly against William's knee. At first, William thought the dog was just looking for affection, a distraction from his own fears. He didn't realize that Smoky's failure in the military, his extreme sensitivity to environmental shifts, was actually a superpower. Smoky was afraid of the noise. He was tuned into a frequency humans couldn't hear. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. William was in the kitchen, his broad shoulders hunched over as he reached for a glass of water. Suddenly, the world began to tilt. The familiar aura of a seizure hit him like a physical wall, a metallic taste in his mouth and a blurring of his moss-green eyes. He tried to reach for the counter, but his muscles refused to obey. Just as his knees began to buckle, balmy kilograms of muscle and fur slammed into his side, bracing him. It was Smoky. The dog wasn't flinching now. His posture was rigid, his intelligent eyes focused and calm. Smoky didn't just stand there. He used his body to guide William away from the sharp edge of the granite counter and down onto the rug. As William sank into the darkness of the seizure, he felt Smoky's warm weight settle across his legs. The dog began to lick William's hands, a rhythmic, grounding sensation that kept the veteran from drifting too far into the void. When William finally came to minutes later, he found Smoky staring directly into his face, his erect ears twitching. The dog that was too scared for the Navy had just performed a tactical rescue in a quiet kitchen. William realized then that Smoky hadn't been rejected because he was weak. He had been rejected because his destiny was to fight enemies, but to protect a friend. As weeks turned into months, the transformation was undeniable. William's rugged, sun-kissed skin seemed less tight with stress, and the deep wrinkles on his forehead softened. He began taking Smoky on long hikes through the quiet woods, far from the triggers of the city. Together they were a formidable pair, a tall, muscular man with a square jaw and a noble, upright dog. Smoky had learned to signal William's seizures up to 10 minutes before they occurred, allowing William to find a safe place to sit. In return, William gave Smoky the safety he had never known in the canine training camps. They were no longer washouts, they were a specialized unit of 2. But their newfound peace was about to be tested. One evening, William received a frantic, garbled phone call from an old teammate from his SEAL days. Jax had been the breacher in their unit, a man who lived for the noise. But on the phone, Jax sounded small, lost and desperate. He spoke of the darkness and not wanting to see tomorrow. William looked at Smoky, who was already standing by the door, his long muzzle pointed toward the truck. Smoky's intelligent brown eyes were fixed on William, sensing the urgency and the shift in his owner's adrenaline. William grabbed his keys, his powerful jawline tightening. He wasn't just a man with a dog anymore. He was a guardian on a mission. "Come on, Smoky," William said. "A brother is down. It's time to show them what the wrong SEAL and the wrong dog can do." The drive to Jax's house was filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. William gripped the steering wheel, his moss-green eyes narrowed as he navigated the winding coastal roads. Beside him, Smoky sat with a perfectly upright posture, his ears swiveling toward the slight tremor in William's hands. Smoky knew this wasn't a normal trip. He could smell the sharp, metallic scent of anxiety rolling off his owner. When they arrived at Jax's small secluded cabin, the air felt thick with neglect. The lawn was overgrown and the porch light flickered like a dying heartbeat. William stepped out of the truck, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow under the moonlight. He looked at Smoky, whose long muzzle was already pointed toward the front door. The dog didn't bark. He simply stood at attention, his intelligent dark brown eyes reflecting the dim light. William's powerful jawline tightened as he knocked. "Jax!" "It's Wynne. Open up." There was no answer, only the sound of a heavy object falling inside. Without a second thought, William pushed the door open. The interior smelled of stale coffee and the heavy stagnant air of a man who had stopped living while still breathing. Inside the cabin was a graveyard of memories. Medals and old unit photos were scattered across a dusty table. In the corner sat Jax, a once towering man who now looked hollowed out. His eyes were bloodshot, staring at a wall that wasn't there. He didn't even look up when William entered. "Go away, Will," Jax whispered, his voice sounding like broken glass. "Mort met a liability. Mort can't handle the noise anymore. Every time a door slams, Mort met back in the valley." William stood there, his muscular frame filling the doorway, but he didn't know what to say. He knew that pain too well. Suddenly, Smoky moved. He didn't approach Jax with the aggression of a trained patrol dog. Instead, he moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Smoky's tan and black fur brushed against the clutter on the floor as he approached the broken veteran. Jax flinched, his hand shaking, but Smoky didn't back away. The dog stopped inches from Jack's knees and sat down, his erect ears forward. Smoky tilted his head, his dark brown eyes filled with an uncanny empathy. He wasn't looking at the hero Jax used to be. He was looking at the man who was drowning in the present. Jax looked down at the dog, his brow furrowed. "What is this, Will? A canine?" William shook his head, his salt and pepper beard catching the light. "He's a washout, Jax, just like us. He's gun-shy." As if on cue, a heavy branch from a nearby tree scraped against the roof with a loud, sudden thud. Jax jumped, his breath catching in a panicked gasp. Smoky flinched too, his tail tucking for a split second. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of running to hide under the table, Smoky looked at Moff Jax and saw the man as terror. The dog ignored his own fear and pressed his strong muzzle into Jack's palm. It was the same grounding technique he used for William's seizures. Smoky began to nudge Jack's hand, forcing the man to acknowledge the physical reality of the room. William watched in awe. He realized that Smoky wasn't just detecting seizures, he was detecting the storm, the chemical shift in a human S-body when panic or pain took over. Smoky S-Barmy Kilo Gam frame became an anchor for Jax, a living bridge between a traumatic past and a safe present. For the first time in hours, Jack's breathing slowed. He began to stroke Smoky's ears, his rough fingers tracing the black fur. His sash shaking, Jax noted, his voice steadier. "Yeah," William replied, stepping closer, the deep forehead wrinkles on his face softening. "He's scared of the noise, just like you, but he's standing his ground for you. He's choosing to stay in the noise so you don't have to be in it alone." The two veterans sat in the dim light of the cabin, one a 9-year-old warrior with a hidden brain injury, the other a man lost in his own mind. William began to tell Jax about his TBI, about the seizures, the darkness, and how everyone had written him off as broken gear. He explained how the world saw Smoky as a failure because he wouldn't bite or chase a flashbang. "They called him the wrong dog for a SEAL," William said, his moss-green eyes locking onto Jax's. "But they were wrong. He was the only dog that could save me because he knows what it feels like to be afraid." Jax looked at Smoky, who was now resting his chin on Jack's boot, his upright posture finally relaxing. As the sun began to peek through the cabin windows, the atmosphere had shifted from one of despair to one of quiet resilience. Jax wasn't cured, but for the first time in months, he wasn't alone. He looked at William and then at Smoky, a small, genuine smile breaking through his rugged features. "You found a good one, Will," Jax muttered. William nodded, his powerful square jaw set with a new sense of purpose. He realized that his and Smoky's journey wasn't just about their own survival. It was about finding others who had been discarded and bringing them back to the light. This story is a tribute to the silent battles our veterans fight every day. If you believe that no one should be left behind, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us reach more people with these messages of hope and loyalty. William stood up, gesturing for Smoky to follow. "We going for a walk, Jax. You, me and the washout. The air is fresh and the world is quiet this early. Let's go." As the three of them stepped out onto the porch, Smoky led the way, his tan and black fur glowing in the morning sun. The dog that was too soft for the military had just led a rescue mission that no soldier could have completed with a rifle. The mission had changed, but for William Wynne and Smoky, the real work was just beginning. The weeks following the night at Jax's cabin brought a new rhythm to William's life. Every morning at dawn, William would stand on his porch, his broad shoulders squared against the morning chill. At Nummi, his military buzz cut was more silver than black now, but his moss-green eyes held a clarity they hadn't seen in years. Beside him, Smoky remained a constant upright shadow. The dog's black and tan fur was sleek and healthy, and his erect ears were always scanning the environment. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were training. William realized that Smoky's sensitivity wasn't just a medical fluke, it was a refined tactical skill. He began to document the subtle signs Smoky gave before a seizure, a specific tilt of the head, a low whine and a persistent nudge to the back of William's knee. William's rugged, sun-kissed skin would often prickle Vekep sweat before the aura even hit him, but Smoky knew before William did. This wasn't the gun-shy dog the military had discarded. This was a sophisticated biological early warning system that had simply been tuned to the wrong frequency for combat, but the perfect frequency for healing. One Saturday, William decided it was time to step back into the world. He took Smoky to a local park where a small group of veterans gathered for coffee. William felt a surge of old anxiety as he approached the group, his square jaw tightening. He looked down at Smoky, who was walking with a perfectly upright posture, his intelligent dark brown eyes calm. Among the group was a young soldier named Sarah, who sat at a picnic table, her hands trembling as she held a plastic. She was a combat medic who had seen too much, and like William, she carried the invisible weight of the war. As they approached, Smoky ears suddenly swiveled towards Sarah. He broke his heel command, something he rarely did, and walked directly to her. William watched, his deep forehead wrinkles creasing in concern. Smoky didn't bark or jump. He simply walked up and rested his long, strong muzzle on Sarah's shaking hand. The young woman froze, her eyes widening as she looked into Smoky's soulful brown eyes. "How did he know?" she whispered. William stood by, his muscular frame providing a silent guard. "He knows the storm," William said softly. He was rejected for being too sensitive, but it turns out that's exactly what makes him a hero. Despite the progress, the TBI was a cruel and unpredictable enemy. One afternoon, while William was working in his garage on an old wooden table, a sudden, violent seizure struck without the usual warning. It was a breakthrough event, faster and more intense than anything Smoky had predicted before. William collapsed, his powerful frame hitting the concrete floor with a sickening thud. His tools clattered around him, and the garage door was half open, exposing him to the noise of a passing lawnmower, a sound that usually sent Smoky into a state of frozen terror. Smoky flinched at the roar of the mower, his instincts screaming at him to run and hide in the darkest corner of the house. But then he saw William. He saw the man with the salt and pepper beard and the moss-green eyes twitching on the cold floor. The gun-shy dog made a choice. Ignoring the terrifying noise from the street, Smoky lunged forward. He didn't hide. Instead, he wedged his balmy kilogram body under William's head, acting as a living pillow to prevent further trauma against the concrete. He stayed there, pinned down by the weight of his master, trembling from the external noise but refusing to move until the storm inside William had passed. When William finally regained consciousness, the first thing he felt was the coarse, warm texture of tan fur against his cheek. He opened his eyes to see Smoky as long muzzle inches from his own. The dog's eyes were dilated with fear from the loud neighborhood noises, but he hadn't budged. William sat up slowly, his head throbbing, and pulled Smoky into a massive, muscular embrace. "You stayed," William croaked, his voice thick with emotion. "The noise was right there, and you stayed for me." This was the turning point. William realized that Smoky's flaw was actually his greatest strength. Because the dog felt fear so acutely, his decision to stay was an act of courage far greater than that of a dog who felt nothing. William looked at his own reflection in a dusty mirror in the garage. The deep crow's feet, the rugged skin, the scars of a long career. He was a broken SEAL, and Smoky was a washout K9. They were survivors who had found a way to turn their vulnerabilities into a shield for one another. It was time to share this discovery with the rest of their brothers and sisters. A few days later, a black SUV pulled into William's driveway. Out stepped Colonel Miller, a man William had served under for a decade. Miller was a stern man with a face like carved granite, and he had been the one to sign the papers for William's medical discharge. He looked at William's broad shoulders and his steady hands with a look of genuine surprise. "Mott heard stories about you and this failed dog, Wynne," Miller said, his voice booming. "The shelter said he was a liability. My report said you were a liability. So tell me, why am I seeing a man who looks more composed than half my active duty officers?" William stood tall, his powerful jawline set in a confident smile. He looked down at Smoky, who stood at his side with an upright, noble posture, his dark brown eyes fixed on the colonel. Smoky didn't growl, he just watched, his erect ears catching every vibration of the colonel's voice. "Colonel, the military looks for dogs that can handle the noise of a battlefield," William explained. "But there's a different kind of noise that happens after the war is over. It is a silent noise that breaks men from the inside out. Smoky was the wrong dog for the war, but he is the only dog that can handle the silence." Colonel Miller didn't leave that afternoon. Instead, he sat on William's porch watching Smoky guide William through a series of balance exercises. The colonel, a man who had seen the harshest corners of the world, was silent as he watched the failed dog lean his Bama-kilogram frame against William's leg to provide a physical anchor. "You re onto something, Wynne," Miller finally admitted. His gravelly voice softened. "The Pentagon spends millions on high-tech sensors to monitor soldier health, but we still losing men to the after noise. We have hundreds of dogs like Smoky, dogs vekepite had elite instincts but high sensitivity, who are being sent to shelters because they don't fit the warrior mold." William stopped, his moss-green eyes flashing with a new fire. He looked at his salt and pepper beard in the reflection of the window, and then at Smoky's erect tan and black ears. "The mold is broken, Colonel, not the dogs," William said, his powerful jawline setting with determination. "They aren't washouts, they are specialists. They aren't meant for the front lines of the battlefield. They are meant for the front lines of the soul." Right then, a plan began to form. William wouldn't just be a survivor, he would be a teacher. He would re-know his garage and his quiet woods into a sanctuary, a place where the wrong dogs and the wrong soldiers could find the right purpose together. A week later, the first recruit arrived. It was a young Marine named Elias, barely 25, who had lost his spark after a mortar strike left him with severe light and sound sensitivity. Along with Elias came a dog named Bella, a lithe Belgian Malinois who had been discharged for the same reason as Smoky. She was hyper-reactive to loud bangs. Elias looked at William's broad shoulders and rugged sun-kissed skin with a mix of respect and skepticism. "They told me you could help us, Commander. But this dog, she's a nervous wreck. She's just like me. How are we supposed to help each other?" William didn't answer with words. He whistled low, and as Smoke stepped forward with his signature upright posture. Smoky didn't approach bellevé capite hat dominance. He approached with a calm, steady energy. He sat 3 feet away from the trembling Malinois and simply breathed, his intelligent dark brown eyes fixed on the horizon. William placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, his moss-green eyes grounding the young man. "She's not a wreck, Elias. She's an antenna. She's picking up everything you re-feeling. If you can learn to breathe through the noise, she will too. Smoky and Mort will show you how to tune the frequency." The training was grueling, not physically but emotionally. William used his deep forehead wrinkles and calm presence to guide Elias through trigger sessions. They would sit in the center of the woods as a distant summer thunderstorm rolled in. For a gun-shy dog and a shell-shocked soldier, the rumble of thunder was a physical threat. Bella began to whine, her ears pinning back, and Elias' hands started to shake, his face pale against the darkening sky. William stood perfectly still, his powerful square jaw relaxed, his salt and pepper hair catching the first drops of rain. "Watch Smoky," William commanded, his voice steady against the wind. Smoky's ears were erect, twitching at every crack of thunder, but he remained sitting. He didn't hide. He focused entirely on the scent of William's neck, monitoring the veteran's heart rate. Smoky was feeling the fear. The black and tan fur on his back was slightly bristled, but he was choosing to remain an anchor. "He's not fearless," William told Elias. "He's courageous. There's a difference. Courage is feeling the storm and staying anyway. Bella will follow your lead, Elias. Be her anchor, and she will be your warning." As the rain began to pour, the breakthrough happened. Elias took a deep, shuddering breath, mirroring William's posture. He reached out and placed his hand on Bella's head. Instead of pulling away, Bella leaned into him. The Malinois shaking slowed as she felt her owner's heartbeat stabilize. For the first time, Elias wasn't focused on the noise of the thunder. He was focused on the life of the animal beside him. Smoky let out a soft, approving huff, his intelligent dark brown eyes scanning the pair. William watched from the side, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He realized that this was why he had survived the TBI, the seizures, and the dark nights of despair. His purpose wasn't to carry a rifle anymore. It was to lead a new kind of unit. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had once held weapons, and saw they were now used to heal. The wrong Navy SEAL had found the wrong dog, and together they were creating a world where no scar was too deep to be mended. Smoky trotted over to William, his long muzzle wet with rain, and gave a single firm nudge to William's knee. A seizure was to coming. It was just a thank you in the language of dogs. Word of the silent rescue program began to spread through the veteran community like wildfire. William's phone, once silent for months, began to buzz with messages from former teammates and strangers alike. Even Jax, the friend they had rescued from the cabin, returned to the property, not as a patient but as a volunteer. Jack's rugged face looked healthier, and he had a new dog of his own, a gentle Labrador mix that followed him everywhere. The property was no longer just a house. It was a base of operations for the discarded. As the sun set over the ridge, William stood at the edge of his property, his moss-green eyes looking out over the gathering of men, women, and dogs. At Nummui, he felt stronger than he had at Barmui. He looked down at Smoky, the balmy kilogam dog who had started it all. Smoky's posture was as noble as any decorated General S. They were a living testament to the fact that sometimes being wrong for the world S standards makes you exactly right for the people who need you most. "We just getting started, Smoky," William whispered into the cool evening air. The dog looked up, his erect ears catching the sound of his name, ready for whatever mission came next. The bond between William and Smoky had evolved into something that transcended traditional training. It was as if they shared an invisible map of each other's nervous systems. As William moved through his daily routines, his broad shoulders square and his moss-green eyes alert, Smoky was always a half step behind, his upright posture a mirror of the man's discipline. At Nummui, William was in peak physical condition, but the TBI remained a hidden predator. Yet, with Smoky nearby, the fear of the darkness had been replaced by a quiet confidence. One afternoon, while the two were walking through a crowded local market, a sudden electrical transformer bellevé kept nearby with a deafening crack. The crowd screamed and scattered, but Smoky didn't bolt. He flinched, his tan and black fur bristling, and his erect ears pinned back for a heartbeat. But then, he felt the spike in William's adrenaline. Instead of surrendering to his own fear, Smoky leaned his balmy kilogam weight into William's leg, grounding the veteran before the shock could trigger a seizure. They stood like a statue in the middle of the chaos, the rugged Navy SEAL and the gun-shy dog, proving that true strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the mastery of it for the sake of another. Not everyone was a believer in William S. silent rescue methods. A former K-9 instructor from the base, a man named Miller who specialized in high-aggression patrol dogs, visited the property. Miller looked at Smoky's intelligent dark brown eyes and shook his head. "He's a beautiful animal, Wynne, but he's soft. In a real crisis, a dog needs to be a weapon, not a therapist." William didn't take the bait. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his salt and pepper boxed beard catching the light. "The war is over, Miller," William said, his voice like rolling gravel. "We don't need more weapons, we need more anchors." To prove his point, William invited Miller to watch a session. They stood in the yard as a young veteran, struggling with a severe panic attack, was led towards Smoky. The air was thick with the young man's distress. Smoky didn't bark or growl as a traditional patrol dog might to assert dominance. Instead, he lowered his head and approached with a slow, rhythmic gait, eventually resting his long muzzle on the man's chest, right over his racing heart. Within minutes, the veteran's breathing slowed. Miller was silent, his own square jaw dropping slightly. He realized that Smoky wasn't soft, he was precise. He was doing work that a weaponized dog could never understand. The true test of their mission came at high Zircumfut AM on a Tuesday. William was jolted awake by the frantic ringing of his phone. It was the wife of a veteran named Marcus, a man who had been struggling with deep dissociation episodes. Marcus had walked out of his house into the freezing woods behind their home, wearing only a t-shirt, and he was responding to calls. The local search and rescue teams were struggling because the area was thick with underbrush and the noise of a nearby highway was confusing their tracking dogs. William swung his legs out of bed, his muscular frame moving with the muscle memory of a dozen night raids. He looked at Smoky, who was already standing by the door, his erect ears twitching. "Marcus is out there, buddy," William whispered, his moss-green eyes narrowed in the dark. "And the noise is going to be too much for the standard K-9S. They need someone who knows how to listen to the silence." Smoky gave a single sharp nod, his black and tan fur shimmering in the moonlight. They weren't just trainers anymore. They were a specialized recovery unit. When they arrived at the edge of the woods, the scene was chaotic. Blue and red lights flashed, and the roar of a search helicopter hovered overhead. William saw the other search dogs, highly trained, aggressive trackers, becoming agitated by the sirens and the overhead rotor wash. They were barking and straining at their leashes, overwhelmed by the sensory overload. William stepped out of his truck, his salt and pepper military buzz cut damp with the night mist. He didn't use a leash for Smoky. He didn't need to. "He's going to be overwhelmed by the noise, Wynne," the sheriff warned, pointing to Smoky. "That dog looks like he wants to hide under your truck." It was true. Smoky was trembling, his tail tucked slightly at the sound of the helicopter. But William knelt down, his rugged, sun-kissed face inches from Smoky's long muzzle. "Ignore the sky, Smoky," William murmured. "Find the heartbeat, find the storm." Smoky took a deep breath, his intelligent brown eyes locking onto William S. He blocked out the roar of the engines and the flashing lights, focusing entirely on the scent of the jacket Marcus' wife had provided. With a low, determined whine, Smoky turned away from the noise and headed into the darkest part of the forest. Deep in the woods, the noise of the search party faded into a haunting silence. William followed Smoky, his moss-green eyes scanning the shadows, his broad shoulders brushing against the wet branches. Smoky didn't track like a normal dog. He didn't keep his nose to the ground. He kept his head high, ears swiveling, catching the subtle shifts in the air. Suddenly, Smoky stopped. He didn't bark. Barking would only scare a man in a dissociative state. Instead, he stood with a perfectly upright posture and pointed his muzzle toward a dense thicket of pine. There, huddled at the base of a tree, was Marcus. He was shivering violently, his eyes blank and staring into nothingness. He was caught in a flashback loop, unable to hear the searchers calling his name. William stayed back, knowing his large, muscular frame might appear threatening. "Go on, Smoky," he whispered. The gun-shy dog walked forward alone. He didn't rush. He approached Marcus with the same gentleness he had shown William during his seizures. Smoky crawled into the thicket and placed his balmy kilogram body directly against Marcus's side, providing life-saving warmth and a physical reset to the man's panicked mind. In the heart of the woods, the wrong dog had found the one person the right dogs couldn't reach. The forest was deathly quiet as the medics finally reached the thicket, guided by William S. signal. When the flashlights cut through the dark, they didn't find a scene of struggle. They found Marcus, his eyes finally beginning to clear, with his arms wrapped tightly around Smoky's neck. The dog's kilogram frame was a furnace of warmth against the freezing man. Smoky's erect ears flickered toward the approaching rescuers, but he didn't move. He remained an anchor until William knelt beside them, his moss-green eyes shining with relief. The sheriff, who had been so skeptical earlier, stood at the edge of the clearing. He watched as Smoky finally stood up, shaking the pine needles from his black and tan fur, and returned to his perfectly upright posture at William's side. There was no barking, no aggression, just a quiet, profound competence. "Moth seen a lot of Kachins," the sheriff said, his voice hushed vekeptet respect. "But Mott V never seen a dog sense a man's soul like that. I guess Mott owe you an apology, Wynne. He was the wrong dog for the job. He was the only one who understood the mission wasn't about the scent of skin, but the scent of fear." The rescue of Marcus was the spark that turned a small project into a national movement. Within months, William's property was transformed into the Silent Rescue Foundation. With the help of Colonel Miller and Jax, they built specialized training areas designed not for combat but for connection. William, with his broad shoulders and salt and pepper buzz cut, became the face of a new kind of veteran support. He didn't wear a uniform anymore, but he moved with a command that was undeniable. The program focused on discarded dogs, the gun-shy, the overly sensitive, the failures of the canine world. William saw himself in every single one of them. He taught the veterans how to read the subtle signals of their dogs, and in doing so, taught them how to read their own bodies. "The dog isn't here to fight your battles," William would tell the new recruits, his powerful jawline set as he stood with Smoky. "He is here to tell you when the battle is starting inside you. Listen to him, and you Luglunk never have to fight alone again." The wrong Navy SEAL had finally found a way to use his scars to build a bridge for others. Despite the success, William's own health remained a delicate balance. One evening, after a long day of training, a massive storm rolled across the valley. The thunder was a series of rhythmic explosions that rattled the windows of the farmhouse. William sat in his armchair, his deep forehead wrinkles etched vekepte heart exhaustion. Suddenly, the most violent seizure he had ever experienced struck. It was a grand mal, a total physiological storm. He collapsed from the chair, his muscular frame hitting the floor with a heavy thud. In the darkness, the thunder roared, and for a moment, Smoky's old instincts flared. The dog's tan and black fur bristled, and he wanted to hide. But the bond he shared with William was stronger than his fear of the noise. Smoky lunged into action. He didn't just provide a pillow this time. He reached for the emergency alert button William had installed near the floor. With a firm press of his strong muzzle, Smoky sent the signal to Jax in the nearby cabin. Then he lay down completely over William's chest, his weight helping to regulate the veteran's erratic breathing. He stayed there through every flash of lightning and every roar of thunder, a silent guardian in the eye of the storm. When William woke up in the hospital the next morning, he saw two things: the sterile white ceiling and the erect tan and black ears of Smoky sitting right next to his bed. The hospital staff had tried to keep the dog out, but Colonel Miller had stepped in, citing Smoky's status as a critical medical asset. William reached out a trembling hand and felt the familiar, soft fur of Smoky's head. His moss-green eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but of gratitude. The story of the wrong dog saving the wrong SEAL for the third time hit the news, and the Silent Rescue Foundation received enough funding to expand to 3 more states. Thousands of veterans and misfit dogs were being paired up, creating a literal army of healers. William realized that his life wasn't defined by the injury that ended his career, but by the dog that started his life. They had proven to the world that what society calls a weakness, sensitivity, empathy, and a gentle spirit is actually the most powerful tool for survival in the aftermath of war. Years later, William Wynne stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, his hair now fully silver, and his rugged skin lined with a lifetime of stories. At Xiaomi, he was still the same powerful man, but there was a deep peace in his moss-green eyes. Beside him sat Smoky, older now, his muzzle greying, but his posture as upright and noble as the day they met at the shelter. Below them, the Silent Rescue Center was buzzing with life, dogs and veterans walking together in the quiet evening air. William looked down at his loyal companion, the dog who was too gun-shy for the Navy, and the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count. "They were right, Smoky," William whispered, his voice a warm rumble. "You were the wrong dog for the war, and Mott was the wrong man to keep fighting it, but we were the only ones who could find the way home." Smoky looked up, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting the gold of the sunset, and let out a soft, contented sigh. The mission was complete. They had turned their broken pieces into a masterpiece of loyalty, proving once and for all that the wrong choice can sometimes be the only thing that makes everything right.
The channel The Dog and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.